This one focuses on business analysis as well as software engineering. So in the first video, we saw that the basic project management life cycle looks as follows. So project initiated, planning, execution, monitoring, and closing. Now we want to know, where does business analysis and software engineering fit into this life cycle? So firstly, we have to see what is business analysis. So the BA is basically responsible for bridging the gap between the technical people and the business people. So this is the person that goes out, interviews the client, understand how the actual business works, then from this determines the requirements for the software, and then writes this out in such a way that the technical people can take this and actually create software or as analysis from this. So it's a very important position. So our assignment will actually focus on business analysis. Okay, so the BAs, they engage with the business leaders and users to understand how data-driven changes or processes, software, hardware, etc., can improve their efficiency or add value. They must then articulate these ideas to the technical people to make sure that in such a way that they can actually determine if something is feasible or financially reasonable. So will we actually have money to implement this? Okay, what does the BA do? They create a detailed business analysis outlining the problems, opportunities, solutions for a specific business or client. They do the budgeting and forecasting, the planning and monitoring of the process. They look at variance analysis. So if there's a change in the scope, what will happen then? The pricing, so how much do we actually charge our client? They do the final reporting as well as define the requirements, as well as reporting back on them to our stakeholders. So they're the ones that make sure that the stakeholders actually understand what they need. Okay, so what skills do a BA need? So they are usually very good communicators. So they're good at writing and oral presentation. They're very good interpersonal skills, very good at facilitating. So they usually get a bunch of people together in a room and they have to facilitate a workshop to actually get these important aspects out of their clients. So they need to ask the right questions at the right time. They're very analytical thinkers as well as problem solvers. Um, they detail orientated. They focus on accurate work. They're very organized. Um, they are able to understand the business and the stakeholders. They focus on requirement engineering. So again, that's what we will talk about next week. The cost benefit analysis, as well as they understand the technology behind the solutions. So they understand how networks work, they understand databases, etc. They are not necessarily developers, but it's important that they understand these softwares and what technology is out there so that they can actually see what is possible in what. Because as I said, remember, they're the bridge between the business people and the tech people. Okay, so what does their project lifecycle look like? The project is initiated, then they do their analysis. They go through the design and the development phase, and finally the testing phase as well. Okay. So here's just a bit of text about all this, but I'm actually going to skip it. There's a cooler slide a little bit on. So I'm sure you've heard of software engineers as well as developers. What is actually the difference between these two? So your software developers are the people that actually writes the code to build software. So they write code from scratch or use components to actually create desktop applications or web applications. Software engineers, they are more the people that look at the software engineering principles. They focus on the design, maintenance, testing, evaluation, etc. So they're more the bigger picture person. They break it up, they design the system, then give it to the developers to actually implement this. Okay, so just a little table to explain the difference a bit further. So engineers are focused on managing, they're responsible for managing the task, where developers are responsible for building the things. Engineering is a team activity. They work with the project manager, the BA, etc., to actually plot the way forward. Where a developer is a very solitary position. You sit in front of your computer and actually just focus on what you can do. The engineers are involved in the entire process, where developers are probably only focused on a small aspect of the bigger project. So if we are working on a system, let's say something where a dashboard for tracking COVID-19, as these are all the rage at the moment, and I am the developer on the project, my main focus would maybe be to harvest data and then put it in a database, and that's where my job ends. Then the next developer would do the next part, etc. But the software engineer is the umbrella that overlooks all these different processes. Okay. Then here is a little diagram. So you can see we have the programmer. They write the code, simple algorithms to solve simple problems. So if you study programming, this is what you do. But then the developer, they can create applications. So that's like when you get some experience after being a programmer, you get experience and then you can actually create complex applications. But then the engineer, they are the architects. They can also write code, but they look more at the scalability of applications. So an engineer is also a developer as well as a programmer. So it's a bit more of they are more specialized and have a bit more skill and experience. Okay. The software development life cycle, what does that look like? So here we start with the requirements analysis, the designing, implementation, testing, deployment, and maintenance. Okay, so I found this image on this website, product owners, chicken and egg, etc. I thought it's quite cool. So we have the business analysis, we have the project manager, and the project owner is the three main points. So you can see your business analysis is focused on the business side of things, understanding the business, clarifying ideas, figuring out the requirements, non-functional requirements. Then you get your BA, that can also be a project manager, etc., that do a bit more. Then you get your project manager. He's the guy that does the forecasting. He does all the planning, monitoring, supervising, resource management, etc. Then your project owner, this is the person that's now responsible. So they ensure that the product, the user stories are ready. They do backlog grooming. So they see, oh, we have all these open issues that still needs to be addressed. Let's see which ones are most important so that we can pick and fix those ones first. So they do release tracking, etc. So they do a bit more of the nitty-gritty organization of the actual product. When are we going to release what, etc. So this is more of a long-term position. Okay, so this is also now a bit of a simplified version of that. So the business analysis, he's the guy that says, build the thing right, build the thing right. Where the project manager is, build the thing now. Where the product owner is, build the right thing. So you can see there's small differences, but they have different focuses basically. Okay, so where does the BA fit into the project life cycle? So this is the project life cycle. So what does the BA do? So when the project is initiated, this is the person that looks at the needs. They define the different goals, they identify stakeholders, and they look at feasibility. When we move to planning, they plan the approach, they do a business analysis, they assess the current state, they assess the risk, They do a gap analysis, prepare for elicitation. So that's um, the requirements in elicitation, as well as then give some estimates about what this will actually cost to actually implement. So the execution, this is the next slide. So I'm going to skip that one over. Controlling and monitoring. So this is just they make sure that the scope remains, that we don't have any scope creep. So they ensure that we are not at the end of the project and then the client is like, but I wanted this as well. Unless the client is willing to pay additional, that's not going to happen. The BA must ensure that. Then in the closing, here they look at performance measurements, the lessons that was learned, etc. How do we take what we learned in this process into what we have to do next time? Okay, so how does the BA fit into the software development life cycle? So this is where the actual coding part happens. So the requirement analysis. So you remember the business analysis guy that speaks to the business people and actually tries to figure out how what they want in a technical way so that they can tell the developers. So in the business requirement analysis section, they're the ones that will actually go and now tell the developers, guys, we need to do this and this and this. So they define next in the design, they define design options, they recommend a design for the solution. They, through the implementation, they support them. If the developers have specific questions, they answer these questions, etc. Then in testing, they review the actual implementation. They check if I click on a certain button, does it do what it needs to do? How is the flow of the website, for example? Is there a limit number of clicks? Because we don't want people to have to click and click and click and click to get your main functionality. Okay. They look for defects and they also do training. Okay. So then in the deployment and maintenance, they review the readiness, make sure that everything is fine for release, and then they liaise again with our client to make sure that everything the client wants is implemented and the client does the final sign off. Okay, so this is just a bit of an overview of what the business analysis does. Again, this is a great career path for anyone in geoinformatics and meteorology.